Ah, Once again, this is Amy Lujan, and this is the Juneau Gastineau Rotary meeting on August 27th. And we are pleased to welcome today Ben Hohenstadt, and hopefully we're close with the pronunciation of his name. And he is the general manager and managing editor of the Juneau Empire right now. So Ben, thank you for your patience in getting on with us today. And we're really glad to have you here. Looking forward to hearing about what's going on at the Empire. So we'll turn it over to you.
All right, good morning. Can everyone hear me? Give me a thumbs up okay, I'm seeing a big nod. Just one clarification, managing editor, yes, GM, no. We're kind of co-equal department situation. It's a little atypical, but it's working fairly well for what we have. I do have a presentation today, so let me see if I'll bring it up and then I'll more than enough time for questions, so we'll do this a little bit like a college lecture style. You'll see a lot more information on the screen than I'm going to say, and if at the end you want me to circle back to anything, just ask. So I thought I would lead with this. I know some folks have old phone books, things like that. These are the most current contact numbers. We use these internet smartphone desk phones that come with an app that enables calls to go straight through to our cells. So if you have these numbers, you need to get in touch with someone. That's the way to do it. Also, our email's pretty simplified, first initial, last name at juneauempire.com. But I think being able to contact your local paper is a pretty important thing. So always try to streamline that process. So next up, I know many people may know me from time reporting, or if you live in the Mendenhall Valley, you might have seen me walking my small Jack Russell Terrier. But in any case, quick intro. I've been in this capacity since February. I came to Juneau a little over 2 years ago now to write for the Capital City Weekly. That kind of evolved pretty quickly. Prior to this, I had been a general assignment reporter in both Illinois and South Carolina for a few different papers, and graduated from Auburn University back in 2014 now. So War Eagle to anyone that means anything to. So just kind of thought I'd outline some newsroom philosophy, my personal goals for the paper. I want to print stories that matter. I want to get the community into the paper and really think on this. We'll circle back to that point later. And I want to do work that our reporters can be proud of and hopefully be the sort of paper folks are happy as their hometown paper, right? So thought I'd introduce our news team as well. They're both on the newer side of things. They've each been here a little over a year. Peter tends to be our State House guy and covers some other governmental things. Michael S. Lockett goes by Sully. He's more of our courts and crimes guy, breaking news. But of course, there's a whole swatch of subjects that fall in between those two areas, so the beats aren't particularly strict. Before COVID hit, there were definitely plans to expand our newsroom, but some of the restrictions in place, both financial hits, but more importantly, the inability to responsibly ask someone to consider moving to Juneau really did us in on that one, but it is absolutely still on the horizon. So some facts and figures. What our relation, I know that seems to be the figure folks really want to know about. Peaks on Sundays, right around 3,000. But folks do a lot of interesting things with their subscriptions. So you'll see blended models certain days of the week, but if you add it to our online subscriptions, we're a little over 5,000. And the web traffic's what I can really get granular on our end. I thought I'd include some fun insight into when our peak website traffic is. It's actually pretty early in the morning, and it peaks at 8 a.m. Friday and Tuesday are our most read days. I've never quite been certain exactly why it is, but I'm an early morning reader and riser myself, so it makes sense. I also thought I would provide our most read stories so far this year. Number one is a story headlined Read My Lips. It's about see-through face masks being made in Juneau. Two is a rare white killer whale that was spotted somewhat nearby with decent odds of ending up in our waters at some point. Three, kind of a dark crime story about a man who is wanted by police for alleged animal abuse. Fourth most read story, the first COVID-19 case locally. And number five is early coronavirus reporting back in January when we were advised, hey, this might affect tourism from China, but we don't think it's going to be a big deal in Alaska. Has not aged especially well in light of how everything played out, but it is what our fifth most read story is. That collection of stories both is very typical in that a wildlife story and a crime story and anything involving a fatality tends to be pretty high ranking in our year-end lists. It's also very atypical because obviously there's never been a year before where COVID-19 could factor in. So I thought I would cover a little bit about the structure of the paper because we have not been under our current ownership for all that long, about 3 years now. We are owned by Sound Publishing. They're based in Everett, Washington. They own a bunch of papers in that state. They also, in our state, own papers in Homer and Kenai. Sound's parent company is Black Press. They're based in British Columbia. They don't really factor in very often, but sometimes folks want to know about that, so thought I would include it. But to come back to Juneau real quick, there's our three front-facing departments. If you're a member of the public, depending on what business you work in, maybe you'll come into contact with our press room or page designers, but it's pretty unlikely. So for purposes of this presentation, you've got our editorial department, that's me, circulation department, and advertising. So this is a little bit of information about the paper's busy day to day. Those stuff, right? So there's usually our two sections, A and B. A is always going to be more of the harder news. B is sports and outdoors. Today, it's Thursday, so you get a C section, that's the CCW, which, if you'll remember, reason I moved to the state, I'm still very passionate about it. And this just kind of lays out some of the philosophy, but basically each one of those at least two news stories, usually 3 to 4. So there's a whole lot of writing, editing, just processing to make that happen. So this last thing, I talked a little bit about what my philosophy for the paper is, but something I'm really encouraging folks to think about is what they would want from the paper. It's the flow of information. I'm a big believer in it needs to move both ways. We provide certain things, but there's some things that happen that we just can't know about unless someone's good enough to give us a news tip. So I always advise people to read what they like. Read it in print, read it online, send us emails telling us what you like, because it has never been easy coverage decision or worse. But the fact is, if no one reads a story, it's documented, no one reads that sort of story, it just moves down the priority list. Kind of, again, moving back to that contact list I showed in the beginning of the meeting, reach out to us. It's never been easier to get into contact with us, to submit a news tip, send a photo, write a content of the editorial. Like many papers our size, we've moved away from the editorial board model. So if you're not seeing your opinion represented on that page, it's simply because no one else has written it down and sent it in yet. I like to give people a pretty long leash on that. And then this last point is kind of relates to the other two, but don't assume we won't care. I think sometimes folks are like, I don't want to bother the paper with that. When don't worry, that's what I get paid to worry about. And if it's something that doesn't quite move the needle, that's a decision I get to make. Or it could be a matter of saying, geez, our reporters are swamped right now, but can you send us a photo? Is there someone who can tell us how the event went afterward? Or there's ways to solve that problem. And I'd always rather know about something and be in the driver's seat on that decision than not. So that's kind of the message I wanted to leave with before turning it over to questions. And again, I know I really blasted through that, but I'm aware that everyone has morning jobs to go to, so I don't want to, keep anyone tied up. So let me see how all right, is the screen no longer, oh, there we go. One more, start video, I'm back. So for questions, do I read them out of the chat or
I
how
have
is
a
that?
question.
Yes.
So in your presentation, you made a comment about get your paper on your doorstep. I quit my subscription years ago when they quit delivering to my doorstep. Are you back doing that?
If you talk to our circulation manager and that's a thing you want to request, I imagine she'd have no problem arranging that with carriers. I know there are some people that do that and it's in their contract. It should either be on the box or doorstep, but that's not my direct department. I'd imagine that would be an easy enough arrangement though.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions?
So I have a question. Do you, so you have like online only subscriptions and then also like if you get a physical paper, what is the percentage breakout of that? How many people do one or the other, or do you know?
Let me see. Again, the circulation figures, I have a little bit of knowledge, which is a dangerous thing. I know for a fact physical subscriptions still outnumber digital only by a fair margin, but digital only kind of becomes a larger slice of that pie. I want to say it's probably about 70-30 print versus digital, and then there's people who take it both ways, right? So it gets even harder to nail down.
Wow, that's surprising. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Who else? Anybody else?
Me.
Amy.
Hey, Ben, thanks for being here again. So I'm a digital subscriber, and I noticed that sometimes you can't find all the content on the website unless you go into the print edition copy thing, like if you want to read the obituaries, for example. Am I right about that, or am I misusing the website?
Now, obituaries are a fun example in that they're handled by our advertising department. So they get paid for, they get placed, and we partner with a program called Legacy. So if you click that obituaries tab, they should be viewable through Legacy on our website. And I've been made aware by folks that there's a little bit of a delay between when they're actually input and when they show up on Legacy. And it's something I've ran up the flagpole a little bit to see, is there something we can do to streamline? I imagine there probably is, but that would be what's happening with obituaries. Generally, anything that's local news that isn't tied to the specific day that the paper is actually being printed. For example, we have those things, formerly community happenings. Now they're a little more health-focused, healthful happenings. If it's, today's Tuesday and there's a blood drive happening today, that's on the inside of A2. That tends to be print only, but there's also some things video, embeddable widgets, that sort of thing, that are only going to be online. There's a pretty big overlap between the two, but there's certain things that each medium has a little bit exclusive. But as you noted, if you're online, you can always pull up that e-edition, sometimes called green edition, and it's quite literally a PDF of that day's paper.
Andy?
I just wanted to thank you, Ben, because if I'm not incorrect, you came and interviewed Diane and I for our recycle competition that we had with our Rotary Club a year and a half ago. And we're going to be doing it again this spring, hopefully. So, but anyway, I wanted to thank you for that. You wrote a really nice article, and we got a lot of really good feedback from it. So I appreciated that.
Thank you. That's nice to hear, because I'm glad you got nice feedback. That's one where wrote it, never heard anything, and I went, okay, I guess that's usually a good sign in the industry. So thank you very much.
Ben, this is Lori, and if I recall correctly, the data point that you had on the screen said, I think you said 57,000 views of the paper. I think that was weekly, but I'm not sure. So maybe you could clarify that, but also I'm thinking, so that's a big gap between the number of people who are actually paying for the service and looking at that. Can you have a paywall, but are people just looking at your website to see if anything explosive is happening, or how could you explain that?
Yeah, that's a pretty easy one. Is views are not necessarily unique viewers, for one, but two, there is a paywall. It's a soft paywall. You get a certain number of freebies at a time. Also, with our coronavirus coverage, just about anything that's related to it, we try to move in front of the paywall. So that just the homepage of our site tends to be one of our most visited pages. So the idea that, hey, are people just going to the website to seeing if something explosive is happening and then moving on with their day? Certainly seems that there is a reasonable percentage of people that are doing that. There's also likely people who finagle their way around the paywall. There's some somewhat labor-intensive ways of doing that I'm aware of, but there's some people who just think paying for their news isn't really what they're interested in doing. So that might shed some light on that. You were right that is a weekly figure.
I have a follow-up question on that. The website could benefit, I think, from some maybe redesign in terms of how to navigate it. My question is this: are you, as the editor, responsible for managing the website, or do you also have a full-time website manager? I didn't see that on your list of staff.
Right. So the website, in terms of what actually shows up there, articles, photos, as far as the navigational bars, the menu drop down, things like that, that I do not have as much control over. I could raise it up to IT, but I've noticed that it seems to be specific to the platform that we use to host the site. So does that answer the question?
Yeah, I just wondered who is responsible for making sure that the stories were fresh. Sometimes I see stuff on there that is many days old, for example, and I thought, well, if the editor has that responsibility as well, that's a lot. So it's just curious if you had someone else to do that.
Right. No, it is me. In terms of stories, if you see something that might be older, there's different sections of the website, obviously. So things like sports right now, it's a bit tough sledding if you want to have a locally focused, fresh sports story. We try to be creative. In the physical edition of the paper, sports and outdoors share a section, but they're separate sections of the website. So I do think that might somewhat undercut what we're trying to do. Other times, if it's something of an evergreen feature or something a little section of the site where I like to kind of keep stories like that, because I have noticed that sometimes the very top part of our website, it can be pretty dour stuff, especially amid pandemic times and with elections heating up. So occasionally it'll be, well, this man managed to summit 5 peaks in a single day, and maybe our recent collection of wildlife photos or something like that. But yeah, it's a blend, and we try our best to keep it refreshing. But we also run into a problem, or maybe not a problem, but it's just the way the website works, where the news section of this site, you don't want it to be entirely duplicative of the homepage, but obviously you want your hardest news at the top of the homepage. So you're trying to balance those competing issues. So it's trying to figure out ways to show the maximum amount of news without getting a little too small, like you noticed.
Right. John Wynn,
Ben, I have a question. Do you have someone who proofreads stuff before it goes out? Because I too often see writing errors or a story in there
Now,
twice.
the story in there twice, I haven't. Can you recall a time it's been especially recent?
I don't recall when it was right offhand, but every few weeks I'll see a story that's been in there twice.
That shouldn't be occurring. That's not ringing bells for me. But we absolutely, every word that's in the paper gets read by me, put through a grammar proofing program, put on page, but there is no, it's not 1973 with a copy editing department. That doesn't exist. I do ask my reporters to swap stories with each other to hopefully get a second set of eyes on it, then get proofed by me, get ran through a grammar check thing, read again on the page. But that's what that process looks like.
who else? Anybody else?
Yeah, this is John Pugh. Ben, so who determines, I guess it's probably you, but I wanted to know, like the opinion pieces in the paper. There are certain people who seem to want to put an opinion piece in every week, and sometimes it gets a little bit like it's more of a rant by them than a real opinion piece over some issue. So how do you determine when you're going to stop, printing that person?
Right. As far as our op-ed page goes, there is actually a one opinion per month limit. If you read the bar, we do have 2 recurring columnists, so I don't know if you're referring to them. Some folks, they must have a notification or else write it down on their calendar, because 28 days after their last submission, there will be a new one in my box. As far as who decides when to put a limit on it, that would be me. You're correct. If I do make certain exceptions to that month limit, for example, if someone names you directly in a response, I'll typically waive the restriction, because it can turn into, hey, everyone beat up on the guy whose take I didn't like. But ordinarily, I do tell keep this on no local opinion submissions, which happens, frankly, a distressing amount of times. I would love to never have to turn to a wire service for an outside opinion on our A5. So again, if you're seeing a cast of regulars, my best advice would be consider being a new voice or encouraging others. But I do try to enforce that 1 month limit as well. So if I see stats, I ask for links. But sometimes if someone's opinion is, hey, elected official stinks, that's an opinion that I can't necessarily fact check for.
So you said you had two. I know the Wynn Groening's one. Who's the other regular one?
Rich Moniak, he's on
Oh,
Sunday.
right, Rich. Okay, okay, yeah. Okay.
And there is some discussion about expanding that or building it out, but it might be an effort that needs to wait until post-pandemic, because it's something that we'd want to consider which points of view we are adding to that
Okay.
stable. So
Thank you.
Great. Rosemary, you have your hand up?
So I subscribe to the print version of the paper, and it's my understanding I'm supposed to be able to get on to the online version. And I get kicked off. I can get in, but then I get kicked off on a pretty regular basis. So any advice how to manage that better? I
know when I log in, depending on device or browser, I get a remember me option. And unless I delete my cookies or something like that, then it just keeps me logged in. Without knowing the specifics of your device, browser, circumstances, I'm not terribly certain why that would be happening. And if it was happening, it should at the very least remember your email, and then it would just be a matter of entering your password.
Thank you.
Right. Amy.
Hey, Ben, I'm just wondering to what extent you have input and interaction with the parent company outside of Juneau. I mean, how heavy-handed is this, or how much do they guide you as far as content, mostly, is what I'm curious about.
Oh, as far as content, very hands-off, I would say. They understand there's a newspaper in Juneau, and we're in Juneau. They're based where they are. I'm sure if we did something radical or unprofessional, and that it would be bad news. But we're not told, hey, we think it would be great if you write about this or that sort of thing. So it really is trying to adhere to newsworthy read, matters of public interest in terms of, hey, is a taxing body spending money on blank? That's a thing that affects people's bottom line. It wouldn't be, pardon the expression, the sexiest news story, but we do consider that when we're trying to do our reporting. So I think that answers it, but I am in contact with them fairly regularly, at least once a week. Our design, somewhat odd, it's an interesting arrangement where we supply the copy, it gets put on page by folks in Everett, Washington, then they give me pages to look at, and then through feedback we meet somewhere in the middle. So in that way I'm in touch with Corporate Hub every single day, but not in the capacity of, have you considered writing about blank? So maybe a little more detail than you wanted, but wanted to answer as best I could.
So even with regard to like stories that you pick up from the wire services, they don't really influence that too much either.
No, with wire services, that's me looking, considering, I know I had heard from a couple folks that they had relatives who were enrolled in or members of Navajo Nation, or I have had people specifically interested in certain topics. If I see anything about the cruise industry, that's pretty much a no-brainer. A lot of wildlife introduction in Pacific Northwest. There's certain topics where if I see it on the wire, it seems like a slam dunk. So.
Thank you.
Hey, Hal.
Hey, Ben, I just wanted to thank you and Sully and the Empire for all the coverage you gave us with our PPE efforts earlier this year. And yeah, Read My Lips kind of has changed a bunch of our lives here in Juneau, and I'm sure you knew that, but I just want to let you know how much we all appreciate that.
Thank you. Yeah, local business stories. Obviously, that one was exceptionally well read for a variety of reasons, but they actually tend to be pretty popular. So I absolutely always encourage people, like I said in the presentation, not every last news tip becomes a news story, but it certainly is the best way to get the ball rolling. We try to stay on top of things, pay attention to filings, the city's legal notices, take different ways home to see if we notice something new. But surest way to make sure we notice something is just beat us over the head with an email. Let us know. So thank you.
Right. Yeah, Tim. And then
Thank you.
that'd be the last question.
Oh, thank you, Doug. Ben, can you talk about the financial viability of the paper? You know, you see papers and news organizations going out of business and just trying to make it work. And you look at the property out there, and that's a pretty big campus for the for there, and then the turnover and changing hands. It's such an important part of our community, being able to check in every morning and see what's happening around. Can you just speak to what your sense of the viability is, and then, you know, I don't know, the impact that the COVID environment has on your bottom line and that kind of thing? Any thoughts, comments to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd want to start with the enormous caveat that I'm not directly involved in the financial picture of the paper. So with that out of the way, my general sense is, and I've been told repeatedly, we're in a stable place. Our operations are totally able to continue. Just like any business, I would say my sense is that COVID-19 has had a pretty obvious negative effect. Just in terms of our local businesses interested in advertising. And again, that's not really my side of the ledger, but still, I fill the spaces around the advertisements, and I certainly notice that there's a whole heck of a lot more space, right? But on the other hand, it has maybe not hit us in particular as hard as some other news organizations, papers that I'm aware of. We were able to secure some Google relief grant funding that actually kept our staff able to work full time, get them back in a little bit earlier than some other places. I think as a whole, it's a shifting industry in general. I know in Snohomish County, corporate has a partnership with a nonprofit that's allowed for the funding of an investigative reporter position. And I think more and more things like that are just going to become increasingly commonplace for the paper. But while the financial side of the books isn't really my main task, I absolutely keep my head on the swivel for further grant opportunities and that sort of thing. Because while our current level of operations, I've been told, is stable and sustainable, I don't see any reason anyone in a management position should go, I'm totally happy with how things are and I'm going to do nothing to improve them, right? So that's where we're at.
Thank you, Ben.
Yep.
All right, Ben. Well, thank you very much for being our speaker today. I don't look at the paper much, but when I do, I look at Juneau Empire. So